Which of these three men do you want to be Britain's next Chancellor? Welcome to the Daily Politics Chancellors Debate. I'm Andrew Neil. The UK has just endured its worst recession since the Second World War. And with the recovery so fragile, there will be no more defining issue over the next few years than the state of Britain's economy. Today, three men, one of whom is Chancellor now and the other two who could be Chancellor in a little over 2 weeks' time, go head to head. Vince Cable is the Lib Dem Treasury spokesman. Alistair Darling is the current Labour Chancellor. And George Osborne is his Conservative shadow. Plus, I'm also joined by the BBC's economics editor, Stephanie Flanders, to help keep them honest. We'll be hearing from our would-be chancellors in just a moment, but first, here's a reminder of what's at stake. This election takes place with one area of policy dominating all others: the economy. The credit crunch put the entire banking system under threat and sent Britain into its deepest recession since the Second World War. Borrowing rocketed from £35 billion a year in 2007-8 to £167 billion a year in 2009-10. And the Bank of England had to slash interest rates to 0.5% and pump £200 billion into the economy through quantitative easing to stop the economy nosediving even more. The question that has dominated British politics ever since is how liable was the government for the problems the economy faced? Were we as a nation underprepared for hard times, with a public too prone to high spending and a government that should have done more to fix the economy in the good times? Or was the credit crunch an unforeseeable event, unprecedented in its scale and caused by external forces such as the subprime mortgage crisis in America? Moving forward, who has the best plan to get the economy growing again? And who will be honest about the taxes that may have to rise and the spending that will have to be cut if we are to tackle the deficit? In the next 45 minutes, you decide which of the parties has the best policies for the economy. Well, just before we came on air, our politicians drew lots to decide the order in which they will make their pitches. Vince Cable picked the number one ball, so Vince Cable, please take your position and make your case.
This morning we were reminding of the human costs of this economic crisis, 2.5 million unemployed and rising. The question is what we do about it. First, the banks have to lend to sound British business, small, medium-sized companies who can create growth and employment. We also need a levy on the bank. We're the first person who advocated it, supported by the IMF yesterday. Secondly, we need to sort out the public finances. We need public expenditure discipline. There are going to have to be cuts, and we've been specific about how this should happen. And third, we need fair taxes. People at low and middle income should have cuts in income tax, paid for by those who did extremely well out of the boom periods and who are relatively wealthy.
Vince Cable, does it bother you that you're no longer on your on the front page of your party's website? You used to be the Lib Dem poster boy.
Not at all. Nick Clegg and I worked very well as a team. He clearly impressed the country enormously in his debate. I've done my job supporting him. I'm his deputy. We've got a good costed programme. We're proud of what we're advocating. We're working together as a very good team.
Vince Cable, thank you very much. Time now to hear from Alistair Darling. Please present your case.
I'm confident about our country's future. Yes, we've been through one of the deepest downturns this country and other countries across the world have seen in generations. But our first task is to secure the recovery. Take away support too soon, cut away that support, would put at risk jobs, it would put at risk the recovery. Next, we've got to get our borrowing down, but we've got to do that in a way that enables us to protect frontline services like schools, like hospitals, like police. And thirdly, and absolutely key, is how do we get the economy growing again? Because it is growth that will bring jobs, and jobs will bring prosperity and security for families in this country. I believe that provided we stick to the course we've set, we will see this through We will make sure that we get growth and that this country can look forward to a bright and optimistic future.
Thank you, Alistair Darling. You talk about growth, but do you mind that in terms of economic growth, you will go down in history as the worst Chancellor since the Second World War?
I know that we've been through a very, very difficult time. We've not seen a downturn like this in generations here and indeed in other countries. But I hope that what people will realise is that the decisions that I took as Chancellor over the last couple of years or so, have meant that our economy is now returning to growth. It is a fragile growth, and as I said, it would be a big mistake to take away that support prematurely. But provided we do that, we can both get growth and therefore jobs and begin to get our borrowing down on a sensible basis that doesn't damage the economic fabric of the country. Do that, and we can be confident about the future.
All right, Alistair Darling, thank you. Time now to hear from the Shadow Chancellor, George Osborne.
Today, unemployment rose by 43,000, and a record number of people are not even looking for work in this country. The British economy is failing the British people. And the question for myself and for Alistair and Vince is how are we going to get Britain working? And I believe, and the Conservatives believe, that 5 more years of the debt and the waste and the taxes that got us into this mess is not going to get us out. So we need action and change. We need change so we deal with our deficit and deal with our debt. We need to stop Labour's jobs tax, which the vast majority now of the high street employers of this country think would kill the recovery. And we also need a more balanced economy, so we're not hitching our entire fortunes onto the back of the City of London. And I believe we need a government with a clear mandate to deal with these problems, not a hung parliament where no one's in control, which would lead to economic paralysis. And that means we need a Conservative government to get the economy moving.
All right, thank you, George Osborne. Why do you think a recent poll showed a clear majority of city and business leaders would prefer Ken Clarke to be standing there rather than you?
Well, I don't know what poll you're referring to.
The City AM poll of over 1,000 leaders in the city.
There was a poll actually only a few days ago that shows that the investors who invest almost £2 trillion in this economy believe that the economic policies put forward by myself, David Cameron, Ken Clarke and the whole Conservative Party are the right ones for Britain, that a re-elected Labour government would cause serious economic problems for Britain, and indeed so would a hung parliament. So the people who are actually putting their money where their mouth are want a Conservative government with a working majority to get the British economy moving again.
All right, George Osborne, thank you for that. So, our would-be chancellors have set out their priorities for the economy. Now it's time for Stephanie Flanders and myself to cross-examine them. Alistair Darling, let me start with you. As we saw from the unemployment figures this week, people are still losing their job, inflation is still rising, and growth remains fragile at best. Why is this economy still in such a mess?
As I said to you, growth is fragile, partly because we have come through the deepest downturn that we've seen in generations, partly because we've had an acute crisis in the banking sector in different parts of the world. But I think today's unemployment figures show one thing very clearly to me. We were absolutely right to take steps to support people, to get people back into work. But if you take away that support now, as the Tories are suggesting, that puts at risk more people losing their jobs and more people being out of work for longer. I think it is the government's duty to ensure that we get as many people back into work as possible. We make sure we get our economy growing, because that's the way you're going to get jobs in the future. I believe that in a position we're in just now, where we're coming through this, where we're seeing modest growth, but it is fragile, the last thing you want to do is to be taking some money out of the economy at this stage. I think it really would be to present a terrible risk, not just to the economy, but to individuals' jobs.
George Osborne, do you agree with Ken Clarke, sorry to mention for a second time, that if we get a hung parliament, the economy is so fragile that we'll have to call in the International Monetary Fund? Isn't that just scaremongering?
Well, no, what Ken was saying is that if markets feel we don't have the confidence to deal with our debts, then we'd have to call the IMF in, and that is a statement of fact. And it's also a statement of fact that the only time in post-war British history that we've had to turn to help from organisations like the IMF, indeed since the IMF's creation after the war, is when we had a hung parliament, when we had a very weak government, and we had a government unable to command the confidence of the British people. So, you know, we've got to be aware in this country of the consequences of political instability, of not having a decisive